Lovely. Yes. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Should we all
So,
mute ourselves to stop?
yes, please. Lovely. Yeah.
Can you restart your introduction?
Good morning, friends. And we have a larger than normal group today who will wait with great interest in the subject which Julie Bailey is going to speak to us on, which is the sometimes controversial state. So I will allow Julie to introduce herself and her topic.
Thank you very much, Ray, and everybody. Yes, and thank you for coming along. So my most important qualification is I'm Mary Bailey's daughter, and I'm also a sexual health doctor in South East London, and I teach and do research about sexual health. So a particular interest is sexual health online. I set up a course last year for medical students, and that's about gender, sexuality, and patients and what they want from us as doctors. So talking to Patsy about what might be interesting, we thought male, female, other was a lovely title. So understandings about gender and sexuality have changed a lot. Terminology has changed a lot. And this session was to have a dialogue with you about things like pronouns. Why are we, some people adding pronouns to their names? So he, she, they, for example. What does it mean to be trans or non-binary? So very much open to you to discuss and ask questions. The way that I like to run sessions is, first of all, I'm going to show you a video, which I think is a lovely summary of some of the issues, and then get your questions and comments on it. To put you into breakout rooms, so to have discussions in 2s or 3s and then come back to the main room. Important to say, please feel free to ask the questions that you want to. That for some people, the topic of gender is quite sensitive. We've all got our own feelings about it. So what I suggested we do is record the first half of the meeting, which is perhaps a bit more factual, and then turn the recording off. And then if people want to talk more about yourselves and your own gender, then we can do that. So to split it into 2 bits. But as we go along, if there's something you do want to say off record, then we can always pause the recording. So first of all, I'd like to put you into breakout rooms in 2s or 3s. Just a quick question about why are you here today? So what interests you about this topic? Male, female, other, gender. So 5 minutes and then I'll call you back. So anybody want to volunteer some thoughts? What do you find interesting about this topic? I'm still trying to make eye contact on Zoom 18 months later.
Well, I will. Yeah. I will say something I think about the 3 of us who were in my group. We were all men of a certain age. Mm-hmm. So this idea that this newer explanation of roles is sometimes confusing, sometimes kind of what's the problem type mm-hmm. of thing, and I find that it is something to me. Yes, I grew up with 3 brothers, 3 sisters,
Yes, I think that summarizes it very nicely. Is for some people, this is immensely important, and for others, left thinking exactly what's the problem. never had to think about it. The world is as it is, and what's going on with things changing and not really understanding what's going on, perhaps, and that it can be a very contentious area. So really quite heated debates about trans and non-binary and sex and gender. What I wanted to do was show you a short video. It's 8 minutes long, and then hear your thoughts on the video. So I'm going to share my screen.
Non-binary. Sorry. 3, 2, 1.
When we think of the word gender, a whole lot of images rush to mind.
Most of us are taught the idea
that people are born a boy or a girl.
And we're expected to act a certain way based on what's between our legs. But that actually isn't true for everyone.
It totally ignores the huge and amazing world of people who are trans and gender diverse. And that's what we're going to dive into in this series.
Being trans, gender identity, and what it's all about.
Welcome to Trans 101. Traditionally, we tend to think of gender as decided by the body we're born in.
People are usually assigned female or male at birth.
But bodies and gender are actually pretty separate things.
Gender is basically part of someone's internal sense of self.
It can be male, female, neither, a mix of both, or exists totally outside of that. A person's relationship with their gender can also change over time as well.
The gender we're assigned at birth usually gets reinforced by the people around us over our lives. Hearing things like, be a man, or you're such a girl.
it can feel like we're being told who we're supposed to be.
Most people feel comfortable with the gender that they're assigned. But for some people, that label never quite fits and doesn't feel right.
That's what's called being.
Transgender.
You've probably heard the term transgender or even gender diverse.
That's when your gender doesn't entirely match the one you are assigned at birth.
A lot of people use trans for short.
That can mean the gender you were assigned felt meaningless, restrictive, or altogether just didn't quite fit. That might seem like a pretty broad definition, and that's because it is.
And the most important thing you need to know, there's no one right way to be trans.
There are a lot of different ways people might identify.
It's not about knowing every single one.
But rather being open to difference when you encounter it.
And also keep in mind that gender and sexuality are largely separate things. Lesbian, bisexual, asexual, gay, and straight are a few different examples.
But we're all those things in addition to being trans.
They're not the reason we're trans.
I think for me, there's kind of been this expectation that I transitioned because I like guys and wanted to get with them more easily. Actually, I'm a super gay lesbian.
When we talk about gender identity, people often think of two opposing groups.
A binary of female and male. And that when you're trans, you go from one to the other. But there's a lot more to it than that.
Putting it simply, non-binary is an umbrella term people use
To describe gender that doesn't fit squarely into male or female.
And this can include people who feel that their gender is a mix of both.
Changes often, or is something totally separate.
Or have no strong sense of gender at all.
Different people might use more specific terms to describe their gender, whilst others use non-binary.
And trans people who aren't non-binary
Who identify as strictly male or female.
and might describe themselves as binary.
There's also a term for people who aren't trans. That's cisgender.
Cisgender is a way of saying not trans.
You might also have heard it shortened as cis.
Being cisgender is when the gender you identify as totally matches the one you were assigned at birth.
The term comes from Latin, meaning on the same side as.
And is used in contrast with trans, which means on the other side of.
It might be a new word to get used to, but it helps avoid a contrast of trans people and normal people.
And instead, just recognize that being trans or cis are just different ways to be.
So if you're cisgender, this is a great word to add to your vocabulary.
Transitioning is when someone takes steps
To socially or physically feel more aligned with their gender identity.
First is social transitioning.
Social transitioning involves how we interact with people.
Such as coming out as transgender,
To ask people to use different words and pronouns to describe us.
or changing the way we interact with gendered spaces like the bathroom we use.
Physically transitioning often involves a person altering their appearance
To what feels right for them.
Like clothes, makeup and hair.
or seeking medical support.
which can involve hormones or surgery. Transitioning isn't about appealing to other people.
Or necessarily trying to look like a cisgender person.
It's about a trans person doing what feels right for them.
And what that means for each person is different.
It's also important to know that transitioning isn't instant.
There's a tendency to think of transitioning as something automatic, like there's a fairy godmother who will pop up and magically change everything. Transitioning is a gradual thing.
And everyone's different.
No two people transition the same way.
A trans person's identity isn't defined by the way they do or do not transition.
So if someone doesn't feel transitioning is for them, that's totally cool too.
Gender dysphoria is an intense discomfort a trans person may feel
About physical attributes or the way that they're gendered by others.
Gender dysphoria can be on a social level, a physical level, or even a purely emotional level. Dysphoria can be really overwhelming sometimes.
having to live with a body or expression you're not comfortable with can really impact the way you're living.
Trans people find different ways to alleviate dysphoria.
And the positive impact that could have is enormous.
Like transitioning, having dysphoria doesn't make someone more or less trans.
And it's not something all trans people experience.
There will be a lot of new words.
We often hear things like, that's grammatically incorrect.
Is that a real word?
Fine, you got us.
We couldn't get any store-bought brand name words.
So we have to go with garden grown, that twice as nutritious.
In reality, all language evolves at a community level.
Every single word.
For trans people, we're developing language that describes who we are.
Because in the past, either a lot of the words haven't existed,
Or those that have been created by people outside the trans community.
And don't always reflect our experiences.
When you're talking about gender and bodies, talk about what you actually mean.
People will have uteruses instead of women when talking about bodies.
Because some trans guys and non-binary people have those too. Or if you're talking about being a woman, avoid things like people with vaginas and just say woman, because not all women have those.
There's also never a need to say he/she when talking about a group of people.
They will do just fine.
it's shorter, less clunky, and more inclusive.
Using the right language makes trans people feel included, and it's actually more accurate as well.
Learning this stuff so you can be more informed is a pretty awesome thing to do.
So if you found this video helpful,
Share it online so it can reach even more people.
And if you want to know more, check out the rest of Trans 101.
Put
Lovely. So I'll ask you some specific questions in a minute, but are there any questions about that? Questions, clarifications, comments? What did you think of the video?
Thought it was very good, very upbeat and positive.
I fell asleep during part of it, so I missed a bit on language. So, but I assume it's available on YouTube, is it?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And this will all have been recorded, so you can listen to it again.
I think I'm more confused now than at the beginning.
Okay, let's unpick some of the terms. So, when a baby's born, the first question is usually, is it a boy or a girl? And that's the moment when gender, often actually it's before being born because of scans. So by the physical appearance, it's widely known what the gender of a baby is going to be. Some people are intersex, just to throw another variable into the mix, which means that they've got a mixture of characteristics. So with genetics or hormones or genitals, they're not clearly either male or female, but actually a complexity. So that is a medical fact that throws out actually the idea that everybody is clearly male or female. But for most babies born, it's decided instantly on the basis of their genital appearance that this is a boy or a girl. And then there's a whole series of things that happen around that piece of information. So, you know, the types of toys, the way they're dressed, the expectations. And there's quite a lot of research to show that a baby dressed in a different way will be treated differently by the people around. So rougher play with a boy child and sort of more gentle play, more chatting with a girl child. So literally from the moment the child enters into the world, we respond in gendered ways to children. So we all grow up with a sense of what's expected of us. And that differs hugely in different cultures as well. So intersex shows us it's more complicated than that. There's this term assigned at birth. So meaning that regardless of the actual genetics, we decide that a child is girl or boy. And for many people, that's just automatic. People don't give it a second thought. But for some children, and sometimes really early on, they just don't feel right in that assigned gender. So a real sense of, this is not me. I'm not comfortable with the expectations of what to wear, how to behave, but an internal sense of, this just doesn't feel right to me. And that can kick in at all sorts of different ages, the sense that this is not the right gender. And then some people act on that and others don't, or perhaps, you know, act on it behind closed doors, but not out in public. So there's a whole spectrum of how someone might respond to that. Lots of the difficulty and trauma, I would say, around feeling that is to do with society's response. So if a boy child age 11 says, I feel like a girl, it's quite extremely common for families and those around school and everybody around to resist that and say, don't be silly, to try and sort of stamp it out, for instance, rather than actually letting children express themselves in whatever way they want to. And maybe they'll be trans and maybe not. But we are in tramlines. I have to say my mum didn't do this for me. So I was always, you know, I wore what I wanted and I skateboarded and played the piano and whatever. I didn't feel that I was channeled by my parents into a particular gender. But everything we see on films, in adverts, children's storybooks, everything gives us the message that there's two genders, you've got to be one or the other, and it's decided for you which one you're in. So trans people start with this feeling of discomfort, can be called dysphoria, which means, you know, a real unhappiness about bodies or identity or both. And then they may change their appearance, so hair, clothes, the way they behave. They might choose to take hormones to change the physical appearance more and might choose surgery or not. So there's a whole spectrum of different responses to that feeling. I would say, you know, that it's always extremely traumatic for somebody and difficult to be able to say that out loud to anybody else. So there's so many stories of really terrible responses when a child or an adult says, actually, this gender is not how I'm feeling. It's very, very difficult. So most trans people have had horrible experiences of being rejected, laughed at, not actually listened to in a sincere way. And within the NHS, people have to wait absolutely ages, years and years for specialist advice. I've got a colleague who works in the gender identity clinic at the Tavistock, which is one of the very well-known clinics. And they offer extremely comprehensive support. So, you know, counselling to really explore what is this about for the child and to support parents too. So it's a complete myth that hormones are being dished out like Smarties. So the journey to actually get to a clinic against all the social disapproval, and then once in a clinic, there's really sophisticated, in-depth conversations and support, and a long time to wait even then before being offered treatment like hormones. But it's contentious. It is contentious. People feel quite threatened by the idea of, I don't know, children being able to identify their genders differently at young ages. Non-binary is a category, so I would identify as non-binary, and for me that means that I don't find the categories of male and female either very helpful for any of us, but it doesn't, I don't, if people say good evening madam or hello ladies, or I absolutely don't identify with being bunged in with ladies. It depends on the situation. So if we're talking about equal pay, then I think, politically, it's actually very important to define gender, male, female, and who's being paid what, for example. But non-binary is, a sense that the categories male and female don't fit very well and not very useful. Some people have a non-binary identity that is extremely important for them, and others like me, it's not the headline about myself. So it hasn't, I'm upset about some of the ways that men and women are treated in society, because I think it's very unnecessary. Telling men and boys not to cry and to be strong and so on is actually very harmful. And expecting women to be carers and to be soft and gentle is very harmful potentially. I'd like all of us to have a whole spectrum of ways of behaving and ways of wearing clothes and whatever else we want to do. So for me, it's arriving at thinking this isn't a useful category for me. For pronouns, so he, she, they, some of the more common ones, and there's more of them. So he and she is pretty obvious. They is a pronoun that some people who are non-binary might choose to use. So it's a gender neutral pronoun, meaning that they don't want to be identified as male or female. Questions, comments? What do you think so far? Susan.
My difficulty is this difference between sex and gender. My personal history, I grew up in the 50s, born in the late 40s, and I hated being a girl. I didn't think I was a girl, I thought I was a boy. And that was really, really difficult. When I discovered the women's movement and learned about the difference between sex and gender, it was liberating for me, because I thought I was born physically a woman, but actually my gender, effectively non-binary, I would probably be calling myself if I'd been born a couple of decades later. So I had no problems with people saying wherever, I've always thought people as on the spectrum, and I've had no issues with that. What I have an issue is having been experienced and seeing my friends and other women experiencing the oppression that women have undergone because they are sexually, their sex is female. I think a lot of, I felt it was perfectly possible to say, well, my gender, I'm not going to accept all the gender stereotypes of being a female. But I do have difficulty when someone who's had all the benefits of being a man growing up, and I was quite, forget about gender dysphoria or whatever, they've had those benefits of not being as sexually vulnerable, of having better chances in jobs and money and that sort of thing, saying, oh, I'm a woman, and I don't like women's spaces where women are safe, because they don't actually have that experience of having grown up as a female and knowing how vulnerable they are. They have other vulnerabilities, but not that. So sex and gender is an issue for me, and I would like that explained better. Sorry if that's rather long and complicated.
No, thank you. Yes, thank you for your viewpoint. and your own experience as well. And to clarify some terms, and this is very contentious, but my understanding and with the research around this area is that sex is a biological fact. So people are born with particular genetics, so XY, XX, but also lots of other chromosomes. So it might be XXY, X0. There's lots and lots of different configurations. And most of us actually have never had our chromosomes tested. So we're assuming we know that we're XX or XY actually. So the profile of hormones and genitals and genetics is sex, and there are intersex people too. And then gender are the society's expectations. So that painting the nursery pink or blue, that's all about gender. Not everybody agrees with those definitions, but for me, it feels very clear that there are the biological facts, and then there's the way that society expects people to behave. I would like to disagree with you that trans women, and let's clarify as we go along, so that's someone who was assigned male, assumed to be male at birth, and then felt that was really not right for them, and identifies as a woman. So a trans woman wouldn't necessarily have had a typical sort of boy childhood. So it's true that they might have, I don't know, been expected to do better in exams, or, you know, certainly would have had a different childhood. But especially if there's that internal sense of, I'm not a boy, I think, you know, everyone has, extremely different experiences in childhood. And I'm not sure it's even true to say that all cis, so that's women who identify as women, they're born assigned women and remain feeling like they're women, you know, that for all of us it's very different. So people's experience differ by class. So if you're wealthy or poor, that makes a huge difference. If you live in India, China, Wales, wherever else, our differences are going to be very different. You know, as Black women, there's so many different ways of being women. For me, it makes a bit less sense to just say that cis women have masses in common in opposition to trans women. So for trans women, and this is one of the big contentious issues, is that some cis women are extremely opposed to trans women being in their spaces. Let's take the example of toilets, which I think is, it puzzles me enormously. I mean, I think it would be much better if all toilets were single cubicles, and then no matter what your gender, if you need a wee, you go to the toilet. The whole thing is blown into a massive row. But the argument is that going to the toilet as a cis woman, if there's a trans woman in there as well, that represents a threat. Actually, it's the other way around. So there's masses of violence against trans women, masses. So masses of trans women actually commit suicide is the first thing to say, because society is so opposed to people transitioning. But there's actual violence, you know, being beaten up on the street. I mean, I'm not sure about being beaten up in the toilet, that's pretty unlikely, but hostility, so being stared at, being told you don't belong there, to leave the toilet. Actually, if somebody just wants a wee, especially in women's toilets, they're always separate cubicles anyway, in terms of the door. I think it's a huge row that's been really whipped up by the media. I think our lovely government is trying to find fault lines between us. So I think my view is that we've got much more in common. Women are oppressed, all women are oppressed. And that if we fight together, that's much more helpful than cis women fighting trans women. Yeah, when trans women, all of us are vulnerable in different ways, but trans women really have a horrible time in society, and trans men too, but particularly trans women. So I think somebody counted up the articles in the press, and there was something like 256 articles in The Guardian. The vast majority anti-trans. So in a whole year, 256 articles. When you think about all of the other things going on in the world, it's very puzzling as to why there's so much attention on trans women. But Susan, are there particular situations that cause concern, or that where you feel that trans women are not welcome? And I don't know. Yes.
I mean, I've got no problems. I've got no problem with shared facilities of any sort. It is an issue to me. And as I said, I see it as a spectrum. Anyway, I don't see females and males. I see it as a spectrum. And I suppose for me, it's become clear that the middle part of that spectrum is larger than we originally thought. And as a lesbian, I've experienced that issue as well. I think for me that the sort of places where you go to be safe, like battered women's refuges, which we've got very few now, the places where you are vulnerable, psychiatric hospitals, where women are subjected to a lot of abuse from the men patients. I know because I've been on psychiatric hospitals, where to actually have a safe place to at least sleep has been really important. And I think that it's hard. It's if you have had a lot of violence in your life, whether that's sexual or physical, and somebody comes in who you are feeling unsafe with, and it's difficult. And I think a lot of work needs to be done on that. I mean, having said that, I have. I do know, I have had experience of men who have dressed as women and said, I'm a woman now, because I have had personal experience of that. You have to treat me as a woman. Or particularly, it tends to be men who like to sometimes be women and sometimes men. And they will often take their manness with them when they are in their women mode. But, I'm quite prepared to accept that I have had a lot of male violence in my life. So that would colour me. But then that would be true of most women who are in safe places. And that's my dilemma.
Yes. So it touches on
very well, but
no, thank you. That's nice and clear. Yeah. It touches on another couple of things, that trans is different to cross-dressing. So there's a lot of, so for women, we kind of wear what we like, really, and it doesn't get labelled as cross-dressing. For men, wearing women's clothes, but not actually feeling like women, wearing women's clothes is called cross-dressing. And many people do that, and it can be for all sorts of different reasons. So that is a man who feels like a man, identifies as a man, and is wearing stereotypically women's clothes. But that's different to trans, where the internal identity is female. I think it's a really good point about trauma, but it also depends on whether we see trans women as actually men. And there's a real logjam on this, where some people are saying trans people can never, in my mind, be accepted as a different gender, or many of us who are saying it's not my business. So someone's internal sense of their gender, I can't know that anyway, but I don't know. It just feels like we are often, or society is telling us how to behave and what to think and feel in many different ways. So if somebody tells me their gender and the way that they want to be seen, even if I think, oh, well, that seems a bit difficult to get my head around. So, for example, someone who's physically not very tall and not very strong, who's male tells me they're male, you know, it might be difficult to get your head around it, or the opposite. If somebody's tall and strong and has strong facial features, you might think, oh, I'm not sure about that. But actually, if we step back and just feel it's not my business how someone else defines. But I think the fault lines are about believing that someone can't ever be a different gender, so that trans women are men, or actually a much more flexible approach to it where we can let people define themselves as they want to. I mean, I don't think anyone should feel unsafe in a safe place, of course. So shelters, it's really important that everyone feels safe from the staff, from other people, no matter who they are, in places like shelters. And an example is women's prisons. There's a hell of a lot of violence, including sexual assault, women on women, and that's got nothing to do with trans women. So I do think there's quite a lot of, I don't know, amplifying various themes, certainly in the media, to perhaps make it a much bigger issue than it needs to be. Kate.
One thing that interests me is it seems that it's much more common now. Is this true, or was it just either unacceptable and hidden, or people just put up with it, or is it? I'm interested in the sort of cultural, societal influence, because it seems to me that commercially there's much more. I mean, I've noticed it with my grandchildren. This pink and blue, or boys' toys and girls' toys. I don't remember that nearly as much with my own children, and certainly not myself. I was an only child, and I played with what I wanted, and I guess I might have been called a tomboy, I don't know. It wouldn't have bothered me whether I was. So I did ballet, and I played with what are those go-karts, and it seemed much freer, and perhaps was there not the need to think, does this fit me or doesn't it fit me? People were different, and some people like certain things to play with, and other people more outdoorsy.
Complicated, isn't it? Because I think with products, there are definitely more divisions into girls' toys, boys' toys, and there's campaigns against that to just say, let toys be toys, which is a lovely little slogan. Just have an aisle of trucks and makeup and whatever, so kids don't feel that they can only choose some things. And that, I think, is definitely tied to sales and capitalism, because if people have different gendered children, then they've got to buy 2 sets of whatever it is, one pink and one blue, to stereotype. And difficult to pass on toys and clothes and things in families if they're gendered. I mean, I would have thought that through history, people have always felt comfortable or less comfortable in their gender and sexuality, but it's not necessarily been possible to act on it or even to name it and label it. So it feels like non-binary is definitely a new label, and that many of us are thinking, oh, that's, that I like that concept. That feels like it fits me. And yeah, that there would have been a sense of dis-ease, but that can come from so many different places, I think. So I think it's more prominent in the media, definitely. There are more gender identity clinics, although there's still tiny numbers of people actually who are seen in clinics and transition. Yeah, but there's more querying of what does gender mean? Ray.
statement, I suppose, and a question. Statement being, I'm a man. I know this intrinsically, basically, because, I've grown up in my family. And I was allowed to show my softer side, to show the gentle males can be. And my sisters were definitely allowed to show their more physical characteristics, type of things like that. And so, having worked with young men who have sometimes known that they were gay, and some expressed it well, and some, it was a mega not good thing for them because they didn't want to be. They felt society was going to give them such a horrible time, yet they were this gender type of thing. So we still have that going on even today.
Definitely.
And the question is going back to the Tavistock, wasn't there a case quite recently where this person was suing the Tavistock for their treatment of them?
Yes. Thank you. So 2 points about gender and sexuality. So just to clarify that gender is about our internal sense, and then sexuality is about who we're attracted to. So I think it's becoming easier to come out as gay or lesbian for youngsters, although I wouldn't say it's straightforward at all. But what's made some difference is the internet. So being able to actually look up, I think I'm gay, when you're 13 or whatever age, means that people can find others to talk to test out, is this really what the problem is, or is it something different that I'm feeling? So being able to join in online forums, go to groups, to think things through in a supportive environment. So yeah, gay, so man attracted to man, lesbian, woman attracted to woman, and that actually, there's lots of complexity around that too. So I think if you're in a central London school, chances are there are quite a lot of gay parents, lesbian parents, gay children. It may not be that smooth, but it's still, people can see others around them, and that it's not a weird thing, not a difficult, well, it is a difficult choice. It's not a choice, that it's not a difficult pathway, perhaps. Whereas there's plenty of communities where it's incredibly difficult to be gay and to really be accepted. So I'm not going to talk about sexuality today because I think that is different, but sticking with gender. And the Tavistock case was somebody who had transitioned, so was given puberty blocking hormones, I think, to become male. So assigned female at birth, and then felt male and had the male appearance, and then actually felt that wasn't right for them, and detransitioned, so back to female. And that person, sued the Tavistock and tried to get puberty blockers banned, basically. And that went to court. And there's a lot of complication with parental consent. So I work in a sexual health clinic, and as long as people, so youngsters over 13 and over, understand the issues and are able to consent, so they've got the IQ and the understanding, the knowledge to be able to understand what the options are about contraception, then I can give it to them completely privately. For hormone blockers, it needs parental consent, but it's often parents who are the most opposed to children transitioning, and we can understand why, but it's very complicated. So the Tavistock stopped prescribing altogether, which caused an awful lot of upset for youngsters. And we are talking tiny numbers, so they're in the tens, is kids under 16 wanting hormone blockers. And what that does is delay puberty. So it just stops them going through puberty until the medicines are taken away, and then they can either be given different hormones or stick with the hormones that they have on board. Yes. So that treatment is not irreversible at all. It's to slow down time, because puberty is often when the most upset happens. So if you've got a boy child, who feels that they're a girl, but it starts becoming hairier, penis starts growing and so on, the puberty is a time when there can be a lot of upset. So it buys you more time to just make a calm decision instead of feeling you have to hurry because puberty is on the horizon. So let's touch on pronouns. So male, female, he, she, they. And I'm going to put you into breakout rooms again. So have a chat with each other about pronouns. Have you ever thought about what pronoun applies to you? Are you happy with the pronoun that is assumed for you? So if people assume you're he or she, does that feel all right with you? Have you ever had to question it or not? And also, if, say, on Zoom, you see they pronouns, they, them, how does that make you feel? Does it make you feel cross, or what do you feel about it? So 5 minutes in breakout rooms again. Welcome back. We'll wind up in 5 minutes, but I'm very happy to stay online to carry on chatting, but we'll sort of wind up formally in 5 minutes, and then can carry on if you like. So any comments or thoughts about pronouns, he, she, they? I think it's a topic that can make people feel quite cross or confused and just thinking, well, this wasn't necessary before. Why are we doing this? It is debated even amongst trans and non-binary people, because it's asking people to declare their gender up front and in their, so if you put it on Zoom, and if somebody's very early in thinking about transition, it's a heck of an ask to ask them to decide and to announce their pronouns. So if that's going to come as a surprise to somebody. So it's not the case that all trans and non-binary people even want pronouns put against our name. But if somebody is saying to us, I'd like you to address me as he or she or they, it's going to be a heartfelt request, that it's, I don't know, not done just for fun. And again, I guess my view is, so I'm just, can everyone turn their microphones off? Do you mind? That it might be a bit annoying, but that actually if somebody wants to be addressed as they, then it's not really my business. So yeah, usually a non-binary person, usually they means that they're non-binary, but not necessarily. Or like me, I go by she because I do think they is quite confusing grammatically. Mostly it means plural, not always. So if you find a piece of lost property on a train, pick it up and say, oh, somebody's left their umbrella. We take that to be singular. So it is used in the singular meaning quite a lot. But then if you're talking about somebody, I don't know, who lives in a group with other people, and you're saying, are they coming over on Sunday? We don't know, is that one person or are we talking about the whole group? So I think it's a bit of a shame that they has been chosen, has become popular as a pronoun, meaning non-binary. But the ship has sailed, actually. I don't think there's much winding back on it. Hattie?
I saw a word, I think it's ZE or ZHE.
Yeah.
Was meant to be more neutral.
Yes, so there are actually quite a lot of different pronouns to choose from, but they has become popularized. So it's an interesting observation about language, isn't it? That, you know, it changes all the time, and terms that are acceptable or not acceptable change all the time. You know, an example might be queer. So that used to be an out and out insult. And it's a word that's been reclaimed as a source of pride, but not by everybody. So some gay people really don't like queer. Some of us do like queer because it's kind of, for me, it's kind of a wide, broad, inclusive term that can mean different things to different people. So yeah, language changes around us and we are part of shaping that, but mostly have to just sort of accept that it's changing. Just before we finish, I just wanted to address when you're welcoming people. So it's quite common for announcers of meetings to say, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, I think that's a really simple change that we can make, is just to say, welcome, everybody. I don't know if the Quakers have got a policy on this, but I was in a lecture, a fantastic lecturer 2 years ago, pre-pandemic, and he said, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. And then inviting questions from the audience, he said, oh, lady in the green glasses, gentleman with the blue tie. And I said to him afterwards, actually, please, would you not do that? And he said, don't be ridiculous. I've always done it. What's the problem? And I wrote him a long email to say, actually, for trans people, if you're saying lady in the green glasses, and that's not someone who feels they're a lady, then you've misgendered them. And instead of listening to the topic of the talk, they're feeling undermined and upset and angry. And really, it can be very, very profoundly undermining to be misgendered. For those of us who are non-binary, I'm thinking, well, I'm not a lady, I'm not a gentleman. And why is my gender being brought into this? I just want to be welcomed into the meeting. I don't want, my gender's just not relevant. So I think that's a very simple change that we can make, is just to say, welcome everybody.
Did he reply to your letter?
Yeah, so having said nonsense, rubbish, I'm not going to change, he then said, oh, well, I'm happy to meet you and talk more about this. And we were going to, but the pandemic struck. But yeah, I might catch up with him on Zoom. Yes.
On Quaker meetings, I think Quakers would say, welcome friends.
That's lovely. And I do like the Quaker avoidance of titles. So then you're getting away from lots of the choice. You know, the piano tuner came the other day and said, oh, hello, Mrs. Bailey. That's my mum, but that's not me by, you know, under any stretch of the imagination. I'm not married and I don't identify as lady. So yes, I think that is a small change that's easy to incorporate, but Quakers are very good at getting away from that kind of language anyway. So, Kate, you're on mute.
Yeah, I remember a meeting where a young friend said, he seemed to suggest that we ought to ask newcomers what they wanted to be called. And I thought, yeah, we shouldn't assume. I get, you know, that was behind it. We shouldn't assume that just on their appearance they would be a he or a she or whatever. But I'm just interested for what you were saying just now. Maybe it could be threatening to be asked as soon as you turn up, you know, what do you want to be called? Should we wait until somebody says, no, actually, please don't call me he or she. I want to be known as they.
Yes, that's an excellent question. It really is. So it's respectful to ask everybody and not to assume. That's absolutely right. And then not to reserve that question for people who might look a bit gender neutral, or you think they might be trans, but actually asking everybody routinely. But as you say, it might be really quite a tricky question. Mostly, I think it would be very welcomed, to be honest. Yeah. Hattie.
How would you like your piano tuner to greet you? Would you like to have an appellation anyway, or not?
No, I'd rather just be Julia. Yeah. Jonathan.
Well, that's interesting because Julia is a very gendered name. In fact, just looking at the participants, every one of us has got a gendered name. And there are some names that aren't, of course, but what happens in that situation?
Yes, that's an excellent question too. So I've got several different names that I switch between. And on Facebook, quite a number of years ago, when I thought I could get away without being spied on, because they spy on all of us, but I changed my name to Jude. And that's because that can be a male or female name. I'm also called Jube, Jube, which is a childhood nickname. But yeah, I like Jude. I do use that name. So Julia Bailey is my work name, but I use the name Jude in social life. And it doesn't feel, that feels, yeah, nice and neutral. Nobody needs to sort of query it.
Your middle name is Vivian, but it's spelt in the male way.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
I didn't know that. Yes, and there's lots of names, aren't there? Robin, Leslie. Lovely questions, thank you. Susan.
I was just thinking about that. This is totally an aside, but actually there are fewer non-gendered names now than when I was a child. There were lots of people who had names that could be either or, that now have been gendered. And I think that's quite interesting that that's happened. I don't know why that's happened. You know, like names like Lynn and Leslie and Vivian.
Yes. Yeah. Shall we sort of formally wind up? But as I said, very happy to stay online if you want to carry on chatting. And thanks so much for all of your questions and comments and contributions. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Julia.
So there's so many. Oh, do you mind?